You're watching Global Trade This Week with Pete Mento and Doug Draper.
Welcome, everyone, to our penultimate show of 2021, which is a word I have learned because of English soccer. Not that I care much about English soccer, but it is the next to last, is what that means, Doug. I am Pete Mento. With me, as always, is my intrepid co-host, Mr. Doug Draper. And we are taking today's 1 hour of Global Trade This Week, brought to you by our good friends at Cap Logistics, to do what I have learned from the kids is called dunk on these fools, Doug. That's what we're doing today. We are taking today to dunk on these fools. We are going to spend the next few moments talking about all the things that we got so very right. We're going to go, because when we first started talking about this, we should take a moment here. When you and I first started talking about doing the show for Cap Logistics, we wanted to take a very different spin on this, right? We didn't want to just talk about things that happened this week. We wanted to discuss where we thought the industry was going. We wanted to take some wild swings at things we thought were going to happen. We wanted to take some risks because it seemed like any old idiot could sit here and talk about what just happened. So, lucky for us, it's been sort of a year of, well, sometimes the obvious, but also a year where we made some criticisms, we did some speculation, and we also took some time to make some, some Oracle at Delphi moments, my friend. And I'm going to let you kick it off this week by talking about things I can't stand, which are your goofy freaking catchphrases. And I'll be damned if you didn't come up with some great ones. So you're gonna kick it off with one of the first ones, my friend.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like it. And we're just going to call this segment "You Got That Right," because it's either a statement of agreement or a statement of fact. So if it's like, dang, Pete, you got that right, which means I agree with what you're saying, or, hey, Pete, you got that right versus you got that wrong. So we'll just interpret, our audience can determine which one of those is appropriate at each of our statements. So we'll go from there. And a year ago, when you and I started this thing, we pitched it to Cap, and Cap is the reason that we're still here. So I want to give those guys a little shout out and appreciate their involvement. And Troy, right there, wanted to remind us, that you got that right. So I don't know. I came in the office this morning. It was already there. I don't know how the hell it got up on the wall, but, Troy's got a lot of mad skills. So here's the first one, Pete, to jump into it. This was back in March 22nd of this year, and I talked about the Roaring Twenties and likened it to the Roaring 1920s and how the pent-up demand, frustration, savings, desire to get out and create some normalcy was going to have the economy, the purchasing power, the craziness of the individual as they became unleashed post-pandemic. And we're going to call it the Roaring Twenties. The consumption that was happening in wood, let me rephrase that. The consumption that was about to happen was going to be monumental. And we've seen that a lot in supply chain issues. Inflation definitely has something to do with that. And all those things are valid. The interesting thing on this one is you got durable goods and a tangible item that has to move through the supply chain, right, which is creating all the backlog. The service industry, where you're providing services where there isn't necessarily a tangible item to go along with that, has been relatively flat. I think there was some excitement out in the summer to get out and interface and interact with people. It's been a little bit more reserved, but durable goods and tangible items have skyrocketed. I called it Nitro, Roaring Twenties on Nitro, and it is going to continue, right? There may be some ebbs and flows, but the desire to get out, to purchase, to consume. I think you made a reference to Cookie Monster at one time. That ain't going away. It didn't go away in 2021, and I think it's going to roll into next year as well. So there you go. And you know what, Pete? I got that right.
You did, my friend. You got that right. You are the king of the catchphrase, buddy. I've got to give you credit for both that and another one we'll talk about in a second. I had been saying that the American desire to consume was going to come back. I did not say roaring back. I did not say roaring 20s. That was all you, buddy. But the other one that I gave you just endless shit for, and I've gotta own it. It was right. I didn't disagree with you so much, but I was definitely lukewarm on, was when you talked about BOPUS. You went all in. You had tour shirts made up. You air guitared. You went all in on this idea of BOPUS. It was another one of your goofy catchphrases. I think it turned up in maybe 3 to 4 of our different episodes. This idea of buy online, pick up in store, how it was going to be a different attitude toward retail. And I think BOPUS dovetails into e-commerce even when, if you think of BOPUS as buy online, have someone else pick up in store, which is also happening as part of retail. We're seeing more and more of that. I've bought a number of things from Apple where I bought it online and had it delivered to me the same day. And that was clearly BOPUS, but it was someone else picking it up for me. You were dead on through the course of the pandemic. A lot of BOPUS was happening. And, as a guy whose day job is working for one of the largest e-commerce companies in the world, I can tell you that even we have announced, as you may or may not know, that we're opening up brick and mortar, massive brick and mortar retail stores where people will be shopping in person, and they'll be making the determination of what they want to buy and then having it delivered to their home. So in a weird way, it's sort of BOPUS in and of itself as well, which gets me to one of the ones I got right. Yeah, which is there will not be an end to the idea of physical retail. Physical retail does come roaring back, but it's entirely different. The idea is that you'll be physically seeing things that you want to go back to your home and then having it delivered at some point soon. As much as it frustrates me, as much as it annoys me when I go into Best Buy or I walk into a clothing store like Nike, or Dick's, and they say, "Oh, we don't have it, but we can have it delivered to your home in a couple of days." I hate that. As I said in that particular, but the number of times I've said, "Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Yeah, I'll have my, size 13 and a half tennis shoes delivered to my home because I've got big Yeti feet," or I'll have, that particular piece of electronics sent to my home. We are seeing more and more of that, Doug. So, the whole BOPUS thing, the explosion of commerce that we saw as well, those are two things that you absolutely had your finger on the pulse, and I've got to give you credit for that happening, buddy.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Nice banter. So, well, hey, here's my next take on this one, right? Going back, this one, I think March 22nd show was one of the better shows, because this is the other prediction I made on March 22nd. I went back, Pete, to kind of say, what the hell did we talk about back at the first of Q1 and Q2? If we spoke about it a month ago, I can't really say that is come to fruition. I can't really say, you got that right, but I can say that if it's in Q1. So March 22nd, 2021 was probably one of my better shows, because this is the other prediction, that secondary ports, both air and sea, are going to get a shot in the arm. Pun is intended on that one. And they're going to see explosion and growth. I'm talking like Charleston, Savannah, Oakland to some degree. And when you get congestion at the big boy ports, you're going to push off, and the water is going to trickle, so to speak, and find the path of least resistance. And so we spoke about these smaller ports. They're going to gain a hell of a lot of momentum. They certainly have. If you've seen a lot of the press, in the fourth quarter, and as the holiday seasons come along, there's been a lot of discussion and self-promotion from these ports about their infrastructure and how they can handle it. The other piece of that was something I spoke about a week later, was about the airports, the ports of air, and how cargo-only locations are going to become more and more prevalent, because you just can't continue to jam air cargo into the same facilities as you can with humans and people, even more so now. So we talked about really Chicago in Rockford has developed their own cargo-only airport. Get it out of the craziness of the Chicago Midway area. Columbus is done with Rickenbacker, and Dallas-Fort Worth with Alliance. I think you're going to see something. We're going to do a prediction show, but I think the Southeast is missing a cargo-only airport. Atlanta's the obvious choice, one of the busiest airports in the world. So back in February 2021, we talked about the rise of the secondary ports. It's obviously come to fruition. And on March 22nd, we talked about airports and cargo only. So I think we're going to, we got that right, my friend. We both talked about it, and I'm pretty stoked. So that would be two of the bigger ones that we came up with.
Doug,
where, hey,
you crack me up because it is so unnatural for you to use a catchphrase. It is like, you got that right. It reminds me of that YouTube guy who was doing the sports, and he says, "Boom goes the dynamite," like he's trying really hard to do it. So Urban Dictionary defines being dunked on as to own someone with words or to make them look foolish. Okay, so I would say that in the case of BOPUS or the Roaring Twenties, like, you definitely dunked on fools, because there were a lot of people who didn't see that coming. There was definitely, but to a degree, I would say that some of that, anyone who spent some time in our industry probably would have gotten this one. Have you ever heard the term to posterize someone, Doug? All right. Oh, yeah. So, yeah. I'm going to give you posterize some fools with this one. Urban Dictionary says to posterize someone is a basketball term meaning to embarrass someone, usually while slamming the ball over them. It refers to the guy who's being dunked on in basketball posters. Quote, "Wow, that guy just got posterized." And here's why I'm going to give you, in the show, a lot more credit for this particular one. Last week, there was an article that came out. It was a twofer for us. So there was a show where we talked a lot more about big companies going out and getting their own ships, which they've done. They continue to do. There was a show we talked about where more and more companies are going to be taking space on bulk carriers and the dangers associated with it, which they're doing and continue to do. But this article talks about Amazon, and what Amazon has been doing is not only are they leasing their own vessels, but they're leasing bulk carriers and putting containers on the top decks. And guess what they're doing, Doug? Did you read this article?
I didn't.
They're going into these barely ever, and I'm talking barely ever heard of ports, like, East Raccoon Gulch, Washington. These ports that have like one container crane that was an afterthought in an otherwise break bulk port in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours, outside of Seattle. And guess what isn't there? Congestion. Yeah. Now, it's taking longer to discharge the cargo, but once it's discharged, these guys have called weeks ahead. They've got their chassis, they've got their truckers, they're ready to rock and roll. And there's a delicate balancing act here of what did that vessel cost? What did it cost to have, the insurance? I would love to have that conversation. But they've done all of those things in that one particular article where I saw that, and I just thought to myself, wow, that is a port I never would have thought to have used. And then I began to look at other articles which begin to mention that there are other people that are doing that. And I'm telling you right now, Doug, Boston, the port of Boston, has been completely dismissed by a number of these large ocean carriers. They went out, they dredged the harbor deeper. They actually put up more infrastructure for these ocean carriers, and they're all not calling on it. So here's this modern port in one of the largest population centers, New England, basically, and they're just not calling on it because it's making the carriers more money to hold that capacity and go straight to New York. And they're like, whatever. When it would be so much better for truckers, carriers, infrastructure, and congestion to bring it to the Northeast and call on New England. So I don't know, man. It's I'm gonna give you some credit on that one too, but a lot of credit on the fact that you were calling in on those other ports. And if only there was more air cargo to give you some more credit on that one.
Fair enough. I'll take half of it.
Yep.
So
I'm gonna give you posters on that one. The next one that I'm gonna definitely dunk on these fools for, I'm gonna spike the ball right in their face, was all spring and summer long. All spring and summer long. Every talking head on the Journal of Commerce, every, 25-year-old analyst with the Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey, they'd puff up their collar on their Brooks Brothers Oxford shirt. They've got 5 of them, a little bit different pattern, and the one blazer that they bought when they graduated from Harvard Business School. And they would sit there and they'd say, surely, this crisis of rates with ocean containers will dissipate at some point after the Chinese New Year, and we'll begin to see lessening of these issues at some point prior to the Christmas rush. And all of us sat back and said, shut your mouth. All right? Just shut it. Shut it. Go back to your pathetic apartment that you share with 3 other people and do your math, nerd. And come and talk to us because we actually know what's going on here. And it's not happening. A few months after Chinese New Year, I'm like, maybe. And then I started saying, no, this is going to take a long time. And then when I began to realize that the European economy hadn't recovered, then I said, you're probably talking deep into 2023. And now I'm saying even longer than that. And now we're beginning to realize that with capacity and what the ocean carriers are doing, we're probably going to see container rates above 5,000 for the foreseeable. We're never getting back to the days of old. It's just how it's going to be. Bro, I mean, we deserve a lot of credit for that one. Yeah.
Dang, Pete, you got that right.
Are you trying to make it more emphatic so that it's more believable? Is that what's happening now?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Doug.
Yeah, I'm trying to curb my enthusiasm. See, I always got the collared shirt, and the sweater, so I can't be too crazy. You got the hat on backwards and the Johnny Cash look, so you can get a little bit more.
You gotta leave the comedy to me, buddy.
Emotional.
That's what happens in this interaction. I'm the funny, goofy one. All right, you're the straight laced guy. That's how we've been doing this for a long time. Okay.
That's how it worked.
Yeah.
That's just street smarts and book smarts right there, right?
So.
You got some kid that gets thrown on an analysis in a big 5 accounting firm that says, go do some analysis. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's looking at a book like Poindexter. He needs to look up into the real world and figure out what's going on. You and I live in the real world, hence the accuracy of the prediction that you made
Doug, well,
many months ago.
Here's a secret. I was that kid at KPMG, so I all kidding aside, I feel bad for those people. I felt like super bad for them because it's a miserable life living on airplanes and in hotel rooms and doing all that work and then having some senior manager who sincerely doesn't care about you telling you to do it all over again, because something that they knew like 4 days ago has drastically changed the calculus of what you're supposed to do, and they just didn't bother to tell you about it. So I guess that brings us to halftime, buddy. Why don't you take a moment to, I guess what are we going to do? Like best of? Is that what we're going to do? Best of?
Yeah.
Best of halftime?
Yeah, I would say this one was earlier in the year. I can't remember the exact date, but it just resonated with me. I read it. I talked about it on GTTW, Global Trade This Week. And then I used it at like every party I was at. It kind of like fodder. Did you hear about this? And to this day, it still makes me laugh. And I have to read it here because it's so. I mean, literally, it could come out of a sitcom, like a Seinfeld episode, right? So here's the quote: "The strategic monkey reserve is exactly what we needed to deal with COVID. We just didn't have it. They didn't have a strategic monkey reserve. Is that even a thing? I don't." And the guy that quoted it was a researcher at Harvard Medical School. Mm-hmm. So, if somebody calls that out from some no-name school, they'd be like, that guy's crazy. But the fact that this person was from Harvard Medical School, people are like, oh, gosh, we need more monkeys in the reserve. And basically it was just, he talked about there was a shortage of lab monkeys in order to test COVID vaccines. So I guess really I don't have a prediction, but I certainly hope that the Strategic Monkey Reserve and the Maple Syrup Reserve up in Canada, that they kind of right size and balance themselves out for 2022. Because monkeys and syrup, you kidding me? Those are two of the most important things going on right now.
Do you imagine the noise that it would make at the Strategic Monkey Reserve?
Yeah.
The amount of the cacophony, just the sheer level of chaos at the Strategic
Yeah.
Monkey Reserve. That would be a sight to see, my friend. So,
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a couple here at halftime. The first is BOPUS is huge, drones rule, and Bitcoin is still stupid. So I did not watch every global trade this week like apparently you did to figure out what I should talk about. Things like how Wendy's did a fry guarantee.
Hmm.
I still contend that Five Guys is the worst fries you can get, and I love Burger King fries. Whataburger better than In-N-Out. I mean, I can go on that stuff all day long.
Hmm.
But the never-ending crap that we give Keenan, by we I mean me, generally during the halftime period, is probably my best of moments during the show. And whether it's my likening him to a junior high school student, my discussions of his long, glorious locks, the discussions that I will initiate about his beard care routine, the insistence that I have that he is some sort of dirt worshipping hippie, whatever they are, those really are the things about the show that I love the most. And the second thing I wanted to bring up is I take up less of the frame every week now on Global Trade This Week. According to the good people at my nutritionist, since January the 7th, I have lost 163 pounds, which I think is a
Jeez.
Doug Draper. I'm not sure. I think that's how much Keenan's beard and hair weigh. If we were to shave him like an
Hmm.
alpaca, we would probably get that much hair. But I do appreciate the many messages and texts and LinkedIn messages that I get. They do matter to me. So thank you to everyone who does that. I'm not done yet. I have a bit more to go, and I will continue to work on it. But I'd say of all the crap talking, that is probably the one that I'm happiest of, and that's my halftime, buddy.
Nice. Well, kudos to you. That's one hell of a commitment for 2021. So, as a friend, and staying healthy is key. That's what's going to keep you alive. So, kudos, congrats. I
Thanks,
love
buddy.
it.
Yeah. Now we got a couple more here, right, before we're done. So I did want to throw one at you, pal.
Yeah.
We talked earlier this year about the rumor that had been out there that they were considering invoking Article 21 and using the National Guard to discharge vessels at Long Beach. And people said I was crazy. But there was an article that came out in the Washington Post on Friday that it actually was being discussed in Washington, D.C., and that Long Beach actually is refusing to say that that is not still on the table. That if we do have a problem with the longshoremen, that they may still do it. And I don't know if that was strategically done as they're negotiating right now, maybe. But to say that we don't have the insight on great information, we tend to really do have great information, particularly out of Washington. So that's one I'm thinking. How did you say it? You got that correct? You.
I say no, Pete. You got that right.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a pretty good one, bud. Yeah. So we
You
did
got that
get
right.
that one right, buddy. And that was a good one from last year. Yeah.
Yep. Well, hey, even though we got a lot of stuff right, we can't be twist our arm, knocking ourselves on the back. There are a couple, we'll admit, we kind of missed the mark on, so we have to keep ourselves in check. One of which is I was a big proponent, not a proponent, but I talked about how the agricultural exports for the fall we're going to suffer tremendously because of the imbalance of where ocean containers are, and that we just couldn't get product out of the U.S. fast enough. And I was wrong with that one in doing some legwork. I think we talked about that like May, June-ish, something like that, mid-June. And I missed the mark because all the research that I looked at earlier today is that soybeans were flat, but corn crushed it as far as export volumes, and wheat and cotton were there as well. So China and then USMCA countries, so China, Canada, Mexico were the major importers of those items. So I missed the ball on that one. I thought that was going to be a sure one, but nope. And I'm glad. The American farmer being from Kansas, West Texas, I'm glad things went relatively well this year. But I missed the mark on that one.
Yeah, buddy. What can I say, man? We can't be right all the time. But even still, it's a massive conversation right now, right? Where there are a lot of complaints from the agriculture industry right now saying that even those empties are too expensive to send back. I've read a number of articles that are discussing how rates, even export rates, are a little more expensive than they have been in a while, and the availability of chassis to get those containers to the port, and drayage rates and trucker rates have been more expensive than ever, and that's cutting into profits. So I'm not going to say you were totally wrong, Doug. I think if we look at the export logistics costs as a whole, you tapped into something there, that there is an outbound export cost that is a total combined cost. And if you consider the complete outbound supply chain, you did tap into something there. So intended, unintended, I think you were onto something. So you can give yourself an F. I'm going to give you a C+, man, because you still were onto something. The
All
work
right.
counts.
Yes.
The work counts.
That's
yeah.
good.
And
That
there's
is
also
good.
a man in the arena that goes there as well. You were willing to say something, and anybody that's reading the JOC or American Shipper right now, there's a lot being said about this particular issue. So, and farmers, they can only control so much of their costs. You got labor, you've got the material to plant, you've got your critical infrastructure of their machinery and their land, and a lot of what they're subject to a lot of costs that they simply have no control over. So, right. So I really only have one more that I've got to mention, and it's one that I'm still pretty angry about. But we were right about this one, and it tiptoes around politics, but we were pretty good about not getting too engaged on it. It's that the Biden infrastructure bill would have very little to do with logistics infrastructure at a time when we desperately needed it to. So, the idea of $7 billion going to port infrastructure out of trillions was insulting. It was legitimately insulting. And, that was before we even saw what the bill, it was, hey, there's going to be an infrastructure bill. And the two of us were like, there's not going to be any real money towards infrastructure. It's going to be to a bunch of things that don't really matter towards our real supply chain issues. And boy, were we right. It was a redefining and broadening of the concept of infrastructure. And yes, there was money that went towards ports, but $7 billion, that's not even enough to modernize Baltimore. And that should give people an idea of the kind of problem that we're up against. It's going to take just an incredible amount of money and time to get this thing fixed. And rather than put it toward that, we've put it towards a different type of infrastructure. And that's, we're not in the business of having that conversation on this show. But we are in the business of having it on that other conversation. And boy, would this have been an awesome time to have put $1 trillion into the supply chain infrastructure of this country when we desperately need it.
Yeah. Well, dang, Pete, you got that right. See, I'm not even practicing. I just know exactly how to point to it. So.
Oh my gosh, that was so awkward.
We're good.
Okay.
So the funny thing is the value of money and the dollar amounts that are thrown out nowadays is just insane. And you said $7 billion. If you would have told me $7 billion just like 5 years ago, that's an astronomical amount of money, and it still is. but now we're throwing around terms like trillions, which is just really hard to comprehend. So when you say 7 billion, it does two things. You're like, wow, that's a lot of money, but it doesn't do a whole hell of a lot with the infrastructure because we need hundreds of billions. But the other comment is that the B word just doesn't have the impact that it used to anymore.
No. Well, you live in Denver. You and Keenan are both in Colorado. And a lot of folks, when they fly into Colorado, they wonder, why is this airport out in the middle of nowhere? And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons that maybe don't make as much sense. But I would say one of the first reasons to me that makes sense is when it comes time to put another enormous airstrip out there, it's out in the middle of nowhere. You're not going to have to worry about a lot of the city planning and a lot of the politics that are going to go into. There's still a lot of environmental concerns. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of issues associated with that. But you're not going to have to worry about supplanting half of a city to do something there. Most of America's transportation infrastructure, look at Long Beach. It's in Long Beach, in some of the most expensive real estate in the country. New York, same thing. It's, New York, New Jersey. It's miserable. Savannah is becoming one of the more expensive parts of the Atlantic coast to build infrastructure into. So at least in Colorado, where you're building a spaceport, for God's sakes, you still have dry, arid land flat, dry, arid land that you can build on, and it's in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, does it take you a little longer to drive out there from downtown? Sure. But then you couldn't drive past that dog food factory and smell that awful smell as you go back and forth from it.
Yeah. Yeah, our kids, when they were little, we'd go up skiing and we simply would say, are they cooking or are they packing? Because if you drove by it and it was smelling, you knew they're cooking the dog food and the animal. But if you didn't, then obviously they're packing it up. So it was either cooking or packing. That's kind of the joke.
Miserable smell. But if you wanted to double the size of that airport, and when you go to China, it's the same general feeling. They've built that kind of infrastructure in a far enough away from Shanghai, from those places where they would be able to build it again. They built their port infrastructure by filling in land and putting it in places that were strategically, we were able to do that. They rebuilt Hong Kong Airport away from the main center of population. What are we doing? We continue to expand on airports exactly where they were and telling people, well, you'll just need to deal with it. And I still contend, Doug, someone needs to get Elon Musk on the phone and tell old Elon, tunnels underneath Long Beach, tunnels underneath Savannah, and have those tunnels turn up on the other side of Kentucky and Reno and, middle of nowhere in Texas outside of Houston, and have the dray operators move from there. And I know you think I'm nuts, and I know you don't see it, but we need to start going 3 dimensions when it comes to traffic, because by doing so, that is how we eliminate so much of this problem of congestion.
Yeah, Pete, I'm not a fan of that. I don't understand it. I understand how you dig a hole, trust me, but I don't know, 2050 maybe?
No, buddy.
But we'll see.
Boring company. Look into it.
That's the
yeah.
So,
the guy sent a mannequin in a sports car to Mars because he was bored. You telling me he can't find a way to make tunnels underneath an ocean port because our whole supply chain is broken? I'm telling you, man. I think he's onto something.
We'll see. I don't know. Well, hey, here's one that I'll put in the 50-50 category, because I think there's still some legs behind it for next year. And this is not going to be on the prediction show. This is just kind of an adjunct. But I really thought that the rail merger with CP and Kansas City Southern, it happened. It just didn't hear anything about it. I thought for sure that there was going to be a whole lot of marketing and effort and hype around all the value and the value proposition that combination was going to bring to our supply chain in North America. And you really haven't heard much about it. So maybe railroads move slower than what I had expected. I don't expect them to put down new rails or make monumental changes in a matter of months or even a year. But I thought they could have used that as a great marketing tool, the combined company, to really hype up the potential of what's going on. And I just haven't seen it. Maybe it's there, Pete, but I haven't seen a whole lot. So that one, didn't call it, but I think there's still some potential for that to happen in 2022.
Doug, I think they were too busy counting money.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these companies were, it was just an avalanche of cash. I think next year is going to be a lot more of the same, frankly. And they were either too busy counting their money or spending it on infrastructure, mergers and acquisitions to think about how they were going to market it. I mean, you know, they were selling the cure to cancer. They didn't, you know, wasn't a whole lot of T&E out there trying to figure out how to sell who had the best brand of awesome. So they were probably just too busy counting their money, buddy.
Yeah.
That might have been a big part of it.
Well, dang, Pete, you got that right.
Doug, it's like the worst dad joke
I don't
ever.
know. It's like, gotta take my notes here and just pop them. You probably heard that on my laptop, but that's kind of it. There's some other things that we had predicted that came to fruition, but I think I'm excited for next week and talk about what's happening.
There was one more. We talked a lot about cyber attacks hitting the supply chain, and boy, did it ever on that Colonial pipeline. And I think it happened like a week after or something. Like a week after we talked about it, like bam, like the pipeline got popped. So that was a good one. But you know, next week, like you said, we're going to get into some predictions, and I'm not telling you what mine are. So I want to see the look on your face, Doug, when I do mine, because I've got some pretty ugly ones.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And Pete, I'm glad you brought up the cyber piece of it. Before you and I started talking more about that, I wasn't a believer in the security aspect of it and cybersecurity and the impacts of the supply chain. I certainly am now. I get it, and I guarantee it is way more prevalent than what you and I hear about. I know a handful of customers, companies that were attacked and hit, and major outages and major implications into their supply chain that nobody heard about. And they're big enough companies that would have drawn attention in the news headline. So, Pete, I will give you credit for that. You've turned me into a believer about how important that is. And that's a great point that you brought up. And you called it. I mean, hell, you called it in 2020 when we first started running this show.
I will send you a file from 2014 when I spoke at TAPA. We're coming up on 7 years ago now? 8 years ago now. And I talked about worst case scenarios when I talked about the economic impact of a coronavirus. I talked about the cybersecurity event on a pipeline. I talked about what would happen if Russia invaded the Ukraine. All these things, and I went bing, 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 bing. I went through all of them, and I talked about civil unrest. I mean, I went through all kinds of stuff, and I couldn't do it again. Like I think I was like in the zone. It was sort of I was drinking so much and not sleeping, and my mind was just in this drunken bourbon soaked zone, and it just all went blah for TAPA, and it came out perfectly. But the stuff I talked about with regards to a pandemic was terrifyingly accurate, Doug, including what would happen after.
Yeah, crazy. Well, I think that's all that I have thusly for this show.
You got that right.
And, there we go.
See, man, it's all
right.
It's about energy, you know. That's all.
It's finger pointing. It's big smiles. It's a reaction. So my commitment to you is I got to come up with another acronym or something catchy for.
Don't force it. Don't force it, buddy. Just don't force it.
No, I don't force it. Just like you, it just comes out. It naturally came out. I was thinking the other day. The one I came up was SCARP, and I think people really thought that was a thing. Supply Chain Aid Recovery Program. I think that's when we were talking about how the government was going to come in and fix all our problems. And I used the term SCARP, and somebody was like, I haven't read anything about that. And I'm like, because I just made it up through an acronym, but it sure makes a lot of sense. So I'll get another one for 2022.
You need to start wearing a helmet when you go skiing, buddy. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Got to protect that mind of yours. You got to protect that mind of yours. It's a national treasure.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.
Cool. Well, I tell you what, next Monday, so I'm old school. No, people normally look down on their laptop to look at the calendar. I look at this wall calendar I have over here.
Do you
And
have the 3-month
next
job? Do you
Monday,
have like the old school forwarding 3-month job? I love those. Oh, I
yeah,
love those.
yeah, the current month's in the
Yeah.
middle, the previous month's on top, and the next month's on the yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I roll. But next week, I love the fact that we're just not going to tell each other what our predictions are, and we're just gonna. So it'll be live, right? The shock and horror on my face will be genuine and honest.
Are we just doing 2?
I don't know. We'll
Okay.
see.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. How about this? If anybody watches this damn show, why don't you make a comment in the comments field below and tell us how many predictions we should come up with? I definitely have 2 or 3 solid ones, and could dive deep if need be. But yeah, 2 or 3. We'll see how it
All
goes.
right, buddy. Can't wait.
Cool. I know. Well, thanks for Cap. Excuse me. Thanks to Cap for making this happen. CapLogistics.com. We only got a couple more before the end of the year, and we're excited. So, Pete, as always, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being part of it.
Doug. Thanks to Keenan back in the booth.
Yeah, you got that right.